Hey friends, it's Simon Hurley and welcome to another video. Now today I'm sharing how to use Simon Hurley Create Reinkers that are usually for reinking your ink pad, but I want to share lots of different tips for creating backgrounds with it and the gel press. I love how vibrant and beautiful these backgrounds turned out, and you can really get so much use out of just one print. So without further ado, let's get into the video. Alright, so today I'm going to be using the Simon Hurley Create Reinkers to do these backgrounds. And my friend Michael from British Monroe just recently did a video on this, and it totally got me inspired to pull up my reinkers and start creating with them. So these you can buy with the ink pads, and they are meant to re-ink your ink pads. So of course I'll pull one out here and quickly just demonstrate how to re-ink it. So when an ink pad runs dry, you're going to want to take the reinker name that's the exact same as the ink pad, and I like to squeeze it across kind of both directions, and then I take the edge of that ink pad lid and I like to just kind of scrub it into the ink pad to make sure everything's evenly distributed, and that will make your ink pad nice and new again. So besides just that, I want to show you how to get more use out of your reinkers to create some beautiful backgrounds today. Now, one of the best methods of application for inky backgrounds like this is a gel press. Now this one is 8 by 10 inches. They sell a bunch of different sides, but it's just kind of like a jelly-like plate, and it lasts for a really long time, and you're able to get some really great prints from it. Now it comes with a clear sheet on both sides of it. I tend to leave the clear sheet on that's towards my desk so I can move it around and pick it up, but you could take off both if you'd like. Now I'm going to go in here first with just the regular ink pads and show you kind of the difference you get between the reinkers and the regular ink pads when we're applying them to the gel press for a background like this. So I'm going to go in with a few different colors of my Simon Hurley Create ink pads and just kind of dab them onto the surface, and then I'll grab my brayer and I'm going to just brayer across to blend them together. Then I'll grab my piece of stark white cardstock, lay it down into the gel press, and apply a little bit of pressure all the way around. And the thing I like about the gel press is it transfers that little amount of ink all over the background to create this beautiful, smooth result. Now that's just using ink pads, and you're going to be blown away when you see what you can create with the reinkers. So I'm taking the exact same 3 colors of the reinkers to give a fair comparison. I'm using Tropical Tango, Psych, and Clear Skies, and I'll just apply the reinker down onto the surface. Now you can see how much reinker I'm applying there. You can always go with less as well. Less is more when it comes to the gel press. And then I'm going to go on here and start kind of blending it together using my brayer. And you can totally see the difference already with the brayer. When you're using reinkers versus the ink pads, this gives such a stunning, bold, and vibrant color since it's so concentrated in the reinker. So then I'll go off to the side and wipe it off with some paper towel to make sure my colors stay clear and clean, and then I'll go into the blue and start blending that out with the green as well. So you'll notice it's kind of bubbling up on the surface. That's because the inks are kind of water-based and the gel press is going to, of course, kind of repel it a little bit, but that is totally fine. I'm going to apply my paper down my stark white cardstock and give it some good pressure, and then I'll lift it off. And of course, you can see that all that awesome texture and bubbling that you get on that surface, but then of course, just that really bold and vibrant color. So that's the main difference with using reinkers and your ink pads. I'll hold them next to each other. You can see it's a world of difference. There's not even really a comparison, but I could see using both for different techniques if you want a more subtle look or if you want the more bold look. Now the cool part about the reinkers is it's a really concentrated color, so I'm going to take any of the excess ink that was still left on my gel press and on my brayer and re-brayer it out. Then I'll go in onto the background with this Swirly Ferns background stamp, and I'm going to press this in for a little bit of texture and depth in this next print. So I'll just press it all around there, give it a little bit of a wiggle. I find wiggling it back and forth removes a little bit more of that ink in that background. Then you'll see that print kind of on the gel press, but it also left ink behind on the stamp, which I'll show you in just a second. I'm going to then lay my piece of cardstock down into the press, and I'm going to give it some good pressure and lift that off. And you can see that awesome texture you get from that leaf stamp that we've applied down. I just love that Swirly Ferns stamp and all that texture that it gives. And then I'm going to spray down that stamp and apply pressure down there, and you get a really awesome print from that as well. So that one application of the reinkers to the gel press gives me 3 different prints and stamped effects, which I think is so much fun, and I'll share how to put these together for cards later. Now as far as cleaning goes for the gel press, with paints I usually like to hurry up, but with these reinkers they don't really dry too much on there, and you can clean them off with just water since it's a water-based ink, which is really nice. So now for the next background, once that's all clean, I'm going to go in with a couple of different warmer tones. So I went in with some pinks, reds, and oranges. And then again, I'll go in with the brayer and start blending those out. Now you can always have a sheet of cardstock to the side as well, instead of just a paper towel. That way when you're wiping it off to the side, you can use those backgrounds as well. Now I'm going to take my stark white cardstock once I've blended that down and apply a little bit of pressure to transfer. And I love the solid backgrounds that you get. You might not think you can use these for a lot, but I'll show you later what you can use these for. And just that bubbling and cool texture that you get in it with all that vibrant color, I think is so cool. So I'll wipe off any of my excess ink on the brayer to make sure it keeps nice and clean. And then I'm going to brayer it out again because you get lots more ink on there to use for another background. Now for this one, I'm going to place in the Charming background stamp. I love the different heart kind of clover patterns on this one. Again, I'll wiggle it around just a little bit and then pull it off. And you can see I dropped it there. It isn't too much of a big deal at all. You can barely even tell in the end result. I'm going to apply the paper down onto that, and you get that really cool background stamp texture there. And then of course, once that background is finished, I can go in and stamp down on the stamp that lifted up any of that excess ink, and that will give me my third transfer. So I just had fun playing around with just this version of it by applying different stamps in. You get 3 different prints each time and you can make a ton of backgrounds. But now I'm going to pull in one of the circle gel plates. This is a 4-inch round plate, and I love this one for kind of using it as a stamp, but it's the gel plates are like way easier to transfer the images and impressions, which I think is really fun. So again, for this one, I just like to take off the top piece of plastic so I can move it around and use it as a stamp. So for this one, I'm going to go in with a little bit of embossing ink. You saw that bubbling that happened earlier, and to try to solve this issue, I used a little bit of embossing ink to hope that it would stick the ink more. It still bubbled a little bit, but I found that it helped kind of slow down the process a little bit at least. So then here I'm going in with a couple of different colors. I went in with Slippery and Wet, Prom Queen, and Tropical Tango, and green, red, and yellow are some of my favorite color combinations, and this is one of my favorite backgrounds that I created in today's video. So I'm going to go in with the brayer, and for this background, I love that it's just a small circle because you don't need to wipe off your brayer, and the brayer covers pretty much the whole thing. So I'll go back and forth, and then with this one, I ended up using a stencil. This is the stained glass stencil from the Hurley Create collection, and I'm just going to stick it down. The gel press kind of takes hold of it, and then I'll take a scrap piece of cardstock or also a paper towel, and you just want to lift off the ink that's in those areas of that stencil. So you'll see once I lift that up here and transferred that down, you're going to want to go in and lift off all of that color there. Then once I'm done with that, I'll lift off my stencil, and that's going to leave any of the excess ink on the background and also give a stencil pattern. So I'll apply my paper down onto that, and there is that really cool background you get. Of course, you get all the different bubbles and texture, but also the texture of the stencil. And then I'm going to take the stencil with any leftover ink and really spray that down. You want to make sure the ink is kind of moving on there with lots of water, because the stencil has a little bit more of a hard time transferring it. But once you have that water down, you can apply it down onto your surface, grab a rag so that anything that soaks out goes into the rag instead of on the cardstock. And then once I lift that off of the surface, you get that really cool kind of watercolored version of the stencil. I just love this background, and I love that it's almost a 2-for-1 deal again. With lots of gel press prints, you get a bunch of backgrounds out of one print, which is so cool. Now, like I said, you can use the excess on your brayer. So here I went in and I wanted a full brayer mark. So I went in and sprayed the brayer down with water to make sure that the color was kind of running and moving on there and was really going to easily come off. So then I took my piece of cardstock and brayered it down the surface, and this created a really beautiful kind of rainbow-like pattern, and I just love that, just using the excess ink that was on my brayer still from that last background. So then I'm going to do another circle background. Here I used a couple of the different lighter colors from my line of ink pads, but still it created a nice darker look because these Reinkers are so nice and concentrated, which I love. So I'll go in and brayer that background out. I used a couple warm tones and cool tones from the line, and then I'll go in and apply my paper down onto the background. And that's again going to give you a nice solid circle of color, which I really like how that looks. There wasn't much ink left on the surface, but on the brayer there was quite a bit. So I was able to use the ink on the brayer to apply it down into the surface. And then I'm going to grab another background stamp. Here I went for the prom dress background stamp and put some of those flowers into the surface. Again, kind of wiggling it around a little bit to make sure some of that ink was removed. Then I'll stamp it down from that gel press to get that really cool texture and background. And then same thing, stamping it down onto the stamp. But this time it was just a circle pattern, which I really like this circle because you're able to kind of only use certain sections, which I think is so fun. So there are my 3 different backgrounds that I created with that circle background. So you just end up with so many awesome prints, and you can use the ones you love and die cut from as well. Now I went back to that large rectangle because I wanted to show you guys that even if you don't have the circle plate, you can always use these to do some different shapes and stuff like that too. So for this one, I wanted to create a stripe of a bunch of different colors, but not create a full background. So I went in, applied the Reinkers down in little stripes, then went in with my brayer and kind of smoothed it out. I'll go in with my cardstock and apply it down, and you get a really awesome fade of color there. And it's super nice and vibrant on one end, and then it fades into the card. Then I went in and brayered that out again so that it was just a little bit of that softer color that we had left over. Then I'm going to go in with another background stamp. This one's called Playful Petals, and I'm going to kind of wiggle it around and press it in, and then I'll stamp it down onto my cardstock there. And that just created such an awesome background. I love the texture of the flowers, and like I said, you don't need to go in and use the full plate. Kind of fading it out or making different shapes can be super cool as well to get more use out of your gel plate. Alright, so here are the backgrounds that I created. There is a ton to work with here, and I'm going to show you how I quickly turned some of them into cards as well. Alright, so for the first card, I'm going to use the Dotted Heart die set from Brutus Monroe. I love how big these dies are, and you'll see me use a lot of his die sets in today's video. One of the tips I gave in the last video was that some of these dies come with adhesive on the sheet holding them in. That's totally normal. And for this, I like to go in with my heat tool here. I heat it up for about 5 seconds maybe, and you want to be a little bit careful because it gets a little bit warm, but it loosens up the adhesive so you're easily able to pull them off of the backer sheet. So that can be really helpful to pull dies out. Now I'm going to be die cutting out of this Brayer background that I created, and I wanted to make some of those holes that were there a little bit less stark white. So one thing you could do for your backgrounds, if you want to make them less stark white, you can go in with the blending tools and use the exact same colors that you use to print and just blend in those areas. Yes, it's going to be a little bit lighter, but I love the texture and dimension that it adds, and it just takes away from that white space. So I'm going to tape down that big sunburst heart die and run that through my die cutting machine so I have that out of the colored area. Now I'm going to grab some press and seal, and to keep this all together, it's going to help me kind of adhere everything easier together later on. I'm just going to add the press and seal down and make sure it's all picking up all those pieces, and that will hold this all together for when I adhere it together. Now I'm also going to cut out that heart die from a regular piece of stark white cardstock, and then also a lot of Christopher's dies have these shadow layers, which is super helpful with different techniques. So I cut that out of white cardstock as well. Now I'm going to take the detailed and lay it onto that shadow one, which is a little bit bigger, and that's going to help me line everything up. And then once that's adhered together, I'm going to go in those little areas that are more detailed, add some liquid adhesive, and then I'm going to take the press and sealed colorful area and lay that into that adhesive. So that's just going to inlay in that white die cut with all of those colored dies in those areas. And that press and seal really helps because instead of picking up every one individually, I did it all together. Now to make this more of a statement on my card, I'm going to grab a little bit of clear sticky embossing ink and then add that all over that heart there. And then I'm going to add down a layer of clear embossing powder. You'll see here when I melt this embossing powder down, it just creates this stunning shiny result, but it also kind of intensifies those colors and intensifies all the different details of this too, which I really love about the embossing powder. Now I went in with several layers of the embossing powder, just going in again with the clear sticky ink and then embossing it, and I did that about 3 times, and this is just going to give a really shiny and substantial look. Now I'm going to go in to finish off this card with a piece of blue cardstock and that same charming background stamp that I used earlier, and stamp that down in Clear Skies on this cardstock, and that's just going to give a great tone-on-tone background to go along with the heart. Now I used this You Are So Much Stronger Than You Think stamp from the Do Dat stamp set. I love the encouraging sentiments in this set, and I add that down onto a banner, and that finishes off this card. I love how simple it was, but to even die cut a background as simple as that Brayered one and turn it into something stunning like this is so much fun to do. So take those colored pieces that you might not like by themselves and die cut them out to create these beautiful cards. Now for this next one, I'm using the Hugs die from Christopher's Sentiments. I love how large they are, and I literally took the outer area of that colored die, heart die, I added that down onto the center of my card, and added down that Hugs die right on top. And I heat embossed that Hugs die as well to add a little bit more dimension, but it's just a great way to get a 2-for-1 out of that, but still have some great detail on the card. So next, for the next one, I'm going to stamp down this cool cat's image in Jet Black Archival ink. And with Jet Black Archival, you can actually throw over a layer of clear embossing powder really quickly and heat set that. And this is really great for watercoloring because I like to have that embossing powder as an extra layer to keep me inside the lines. Now, I'm not going to share too much watercoloring, but I'm using Simon Hurley Create inks, and one of my biggest tips is to add a little bit of a layer of water at the beginning and then go in with the inks, and that'll help everything blend together really nicely. So I did just a layer of gray on the cat, and then when I let it all dry, I went in and did some extra stripes using less water and that same exact color to build it up. Now, I didn't show the rest of this card, but I used that flower kind of faded backdrop, added the cat down in a sentiment, and that finishes it off really easily, so just using stamped images can really help finish off a background. Now for the next one, I've cut out a couple of the butterflies using the butterfly wings die set from Brutus Monroe. I love the details in this one, and then to adhere them down, I just add a little bit of liquid adhesive right to the center. That's going to hold down the center of the butterfly really nice and sturdy, but I let the wings kind of stay upright. You can always add a little bit of foam tape under those, but I like that it adds kind of a 3D effect. Now I stamped down an I Miss You sentiment from that cool cat stamp set onto the card directly, and I didn't love it. So I ended up white heat embossing it onto a strip of cardstock, and I liked that a lot more, and I added that right down on top. So that fixes the mistake, and nobody would ever know. And those butterflies just finish off that background so easily. Now for this next one, I'm going to tape down a butterfly and its shadow layer. I love that he includes the shadow layers. And then I'll adhere that down onto a card base, the outer layer. And since it had that shadow, it cuts out a little inside layer, and you can also use it to cut out a shadow. But here it leaves a little bit of space in between the butterfly and the background. But by adhering it together, it finishes off that background but keeps it as a butterfly itself. Then I'm using a Sentimental Flowers stamp set, and I'm going to take the Thinking of You sentiment, add that down in my Misty stamping tool because I ended up stamping it twice in the exact same spot to make it nice and dark. But I always stamp my sentiments if they're last minute in the Misty, so I don't ruin my card. But here is that fun card. I love how that butterfly kind of stands out from the background, and that shadow layer is super helpful, but that just finishes off the card so beautifully. Now for this next one, I'm taking that same heart kind of like outer layer that I cut earlier. You can really keep using the same things. And I use one of those solid backgrounds that I created with the gel press. Then I'm going to go in here and just stamp down some of the flowers and leaves from the Sentimental Flowers stamp set. And then again, clear heat emboss those and heat set those until they're nice and shiny. And that just creates a nice barrier, but also makes them nice and glossy black. Now to go in and quickly color these, I'm going to go in with some of the Gina K blender brushes or any blending tool that you have and my Simon Hurley Create inks and just blend these out. This is a super quick way to add the coloring, and then for any details, I go in with these detailed blending tools from Ranger. I love how tiny they are, so you're able to get into those smaller areas and add just a little bit of shading. And I'll do the same thing with the leaves. This is a great way to color in the flowers. If you're not like a big fan of watercoloring, this is super easy and makes anyone look like a pro. So then I'll go in, cut those out, add it down to the card, and then I use a sentiment from that same Sentimental Flower stamp set. But again, just using a stamped image like this flower to finish off that background so nice and easily. I love how that turned out. Alright, I hope you guys really enjoyed that and will give it a try as well. These were so much fun to create. Now leave me a comment down below letting me know which card from today's video was your favorite, and be sure to give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing so you never miss another card making and crafting video like this one from me. Alright guys, I'll see you very, very soon. Have a great day. Bye!